The Queen of Aetheria stood before her entire court and asked a question no mother should ever have to ask. "Will no one marry my daughter?" Silence. Not the silence of respect. Not the silence of consideration. The silence of 200 nobles, suddenly fascinated by the floor beneath their feet. Lords who had led armies looked away. Dukes who had crossed star systems found their sleeves desperately interesting. The queen waited. Her daughter, Princess Séverine, stood beside her, a young woman with 3 days left to live, watching the room she had been raised in refuse to save her. The queen asked again, "Will no one marry my daughter?" Still nothing. And then footsteps. Slow. Uneven. One boot squeaking faintly with every step. A man walked forward through the parted crowd. He wore a grease-stained engineer's jacket. He carried no title, no sword, no name anyone in that hall recognized. Just a quiet, slightly puzzled expression. The look of a man who genuinely wasn't sure how he had ended up in a royal palace that morning. He stopped before the throne. He scratched the back of his neck, and he said very simply, "Well, someone should." What no one in that hall knew yet, not the queen, not the princess, not even the man himself, was that his arrival was no accident. And the secret he was about to uncover had been buried inside that palace for 22 years. Roan Maddox had a rule about palaces. Don't go inside them. It was a simple rule, a good rule, the kind of rule a man developed after 30 years of life had taught him that fancy buildings tended to come with fancy problems. Problems that didn't get solved with a wrench. Which is why on the morning everything changed, Roan was exactly where he wanted to be. Knee-deep in the guts of a malfunctioning cargo shuttle. Coffee gone cold beside him. A diagnostic drone hovering over his shoulder like an annoying little cousin. "Stop scanning my elbow," Roan muttered. The drone beeped. I said stop. The drone beeped again. Defiantly. Roan sighed. He pulled himself out of the access panel, wiped grease across his forehead with the back of his glove, and gave the drone a long look. The kind of look a man gives a machine right before that machine learns humility. "You and I are going to have a conversation," he told it. But the conversation never happened. Because at that exact moment the wall-comm chirped, and a voice he didn't recognize said his name. Not his name as he knew it. "Lord Maddox, your transport is ready." Roan blinked. He looked at the drone. The drone, having no opinion on titles, beeped politely. "Lord," Roan said out loud. He waited for the joke, for someone to laugh. For Marcus from Shift 2 to come walking around the corner with a paper crown saying "Gotcha." Nobody came. The comm chirped again. "Lord Maddox, please proceed to the eastern dock. The royal escort is waiting." Royal escort. Roan looked down at himself. Grease on the sleeve. A small burn mark on his collar from a soldering accident last Tuesday. One boot, the left one that squeaked faintly when he walked, because he'd repaired the sole himself with a piece of polymer that absolutely was not designed for boot soles. "Well," he said quietly, "this is going to be embarrassing for someone." He assumed it would be embarrassing for the dock clerk. Some poor kid who had typed the wrong code into the wrong system. Roan figured he'd walk over, clear it up, get a free coffee out of the apology, and be back inside the cargo shuttle before lunch. That was the plan. That was a very, very wrong plan. Because by the time Roan had reached the eastern dock, 2 extremely tall guards in ceremonial armor had stepped forward, bowed, and gestured toward a transport that looked less like a shuttle and more like a small floating cathedral. "Lord Maddox," the taller one said. "I'm not a lord." "This way, my lord." "I just said, 'This way, my lord.'" The guards were polite. Their weapons were not. Roan looked at the cathedral shuttle. He looked at the guards. He looked briefly longingly at the little maintenance bay, where he had been very happy 10 minutes ago. Then he sighed the sigh of a man whose Tuesday had clearly decided to take a sharp left turn. "Fine," he said. "But just so we're clear, I want it on the record. I told you I'm not a lord." "Noted, my lord." "That's not how that works." The shuttle doors closed behind him. The shuttle doors, as it turned out, were the last simple thing about that day. The transport rose, the clouds thinned, and through the curved viewport, Roan watched the world he knew shrink beneath him, replaced by something he had only ever seen in distant photographs. The Palace of Aetheria. It was bigger than 3 cities stacked together. White stone and silver steel towers that reached so high, they actually pierced the lower atmosphere, and at the very top gardens. Floating gardens, hanging in the sky like the architect had forgotten that gravity was a thing, and nobody had ever bothered to remind him. Roan stared. "Okay," he said softly. "That's not a palace. That's a planet with opinions." The taller guard didn't react. Guards rarely did. Roan settled back into his seat. He told himself the same thing he always told himself when a situation got strange. Stay calm. Watch. Listen. Whatever this is, it's a misunderstanding, and misunderstandings are just problems with too many words. He was very good at solving problems. He was about to discover that this was not a problem. This was a question. And the question was about to be asked in front of 200 people. The transport docked inside the lower court, and Roan was escorted politely firmly, with absolutely no room for negotiation through 3 sets of doors, 2 crystal corridors, and 1 staircase that seemed to spiral upward forever. He emerged into a room. He stopped. He had to, because nothing in his 30 years of life had prepared him for the Great Hall of Aetheria. The ceiling was made of crystal panels. They floated. Actually floated. Not held up by cables or beams. Just suspended in the air, slowly rotating, scattering pale moonlight across the chamber in long blue ribbons. 200 nobles stood in clusters along the polished floor, dressed in flowing robes, threaded with delicate veins of glowing thread. Their long, pointed ears curved gracefully through their hairstyles. Their armor, even the ceremonial kind, looked sharper than Roan's entire toolkit, and every single one of them was looking at him. Roan cleared his throat. He waved. Approximately 40 nobles immediately stopped looking at him. "Tough crowd," he murmured. A guard nudged him forward. He shuffled into a spot near the back of the hall, between a tall man with hair like polished copper and a woman whose dress made a soft humming sound when she moved. Roan glanced at the woman. He glanced at his own jacket. He decided not to compare the two. The hall was tense. He couldn't put his finger on why. But he had spent too many years inside reactor rooms not to recognize the feeling of a system about to overload. He leaned slightly toward the copper-haired noble. "So," he whispered, "is this the part of the night where everyone stands around looking mysterious? Or did the music break?" The noble turned and looked at him with the expression of a man watching someone walk cheerfully off a cliff. "Silence," the noble whispered, "is appropriate to—" "Ah," Roan nodded. "Ceremonial silence. Got it." The noble did not respond. Roan rocked back on his heels. His left boot squeaked. Several heads turned. He smiled apologetically. The boot squeaked again. He stopped moving. And then, at the far end of the hall, the great doors opened. Not with a sound, with an absence of sound, as if the room itself had inhaled. A woman walked in. Roan didn't need to be told who she was. Queen of Aetheria moved like a glacier in armor. Silver plates etched with symbols he couldn't read. A cape that fell from her shoulders like liquid moonlight. Her face, sharp, weathered, beautiful in the way mountains were beautiful, carried something he hadn't expected. Exhaustion. Real exhaustion. The kind that no crown could hide. And beside her, walking just one step behind, was the princess. Princess Severin. Roan's first thought was that she was younger than he had expected. His second thought was that she was very, very still. Not stillness like a statue. Stillness like a person who had learned a long time ago that drawing attention was dangerous. Her dress was pale. Her ears, like her mother's, were long and graceful. Her eyes moved across the crowd once, slowly, carefully, and in that one slow look, Roan saw it. She had already given up. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. He had seen that look before. On engineers staring down a reactor they couldn't save. On pilots watching their ships die. It was the look of someone who had stopped expecting good news. Roan didn't like that look. Not at all. The court bowed. Roan, half a beat late, did something his body believed was a bow. It was closer to a backstretch. Queen of Aetheria stepped onto the central platform. She was silent for a long moment. The hall was silent with her. Roan's boot squeaked. He froze. 40 nobles glared. The queen mercifully didn't seem to notice. She inhaled slowly the way a person inhales, before saying something that will cost them. Then she spoke. "My people." The court straightened. "There are matters," she said, "that can no longer wait." Something in her voice tightened the room. Roan felt it in his chest. Not drama, not theater. Real weight. A queen who was not performing. A mother who had run out of time. "For generations," she continued, "our bloodline has carried a burden." She paused. "And that burden has now reached its final hour." The hall did not move. She turned. Slowly. Her eyes traveled across the rows of nobles, across the lords and dukes and princes of Aetheria, across men and women who by every standard they had been raised with should have been the ones to step forward. She drew in one more breath, and she said it. "Will no one marry my daughter?" The silence that followed was not silence. It was a vacuum. Roan felt every noble in the room suddenly become extremely interested in the ceiling. The architecture, the patterns in the floor. One man adjusted his sleeve for what felt like a full minute. Another lowered his eyes so quickly that Roan suspected he had practiced the motion in a mirror. No one spoke. No one moved. Roan waited. Surely, someone in this room of 200 important people had a response. A polite refusal. A diplomatic cough. Something. Nothing. He turned slightly toward the copper-haired noble. "So," he whispered, "is this the dramatic pause part?" The noble looked horrified. "Be quiet. It's just, be quiet." Roan was quiet. The queen waited. Her daughter waited. The two of them stood on that platform in the most beautiful palace in the galaxy, and the entire court. Every single noble who had ever bowed to them eaten their food, drunk their wine, couldn't even look at them. And the princess, the princess didn't even seem surprised. That was the part that bothered Roan the most. Not the silence. Her face during the silence, like she had stood through this exact moment before, like she already knew the ending. He scratched the back of his neck. He looked left. No volunteers. He looked right. Still none. A muscle in the queen's jaw moved. "I ask again," she said. Sharper this time. The crystal walls seemed to carry her words further. "Will no one marry my daughter?" A noble in the third row took an actual step backward, as if distance could excuse him. Roan stared. He thought of his father. He didn't mean to. The thought just came. Unannounced. The way his father's memory always did. A man with grease under his fingernails, and a small steel watch on his wrist. A man who had told an 8-year-old boy, on the last morning Roan would ever see him alive, "Listen, kid, the world's full of broken things. Don't be the kind of person who walks past them." 22 years. 22 years that watch had been in his pocket. 22 years he had remembered those words. He had built a whole life around them. Reactors, engines, cooling systems, anything broken. He fixed it. He didn't walk past. And now, he was standing in a room, and there was a woman on a platform, and she was breaking right in front of him. And nobody was stepping forward. Roan exhaled. "Oh no," he whispered to himself. Don't do it. Don't be the guy who," his foot moved, "does this." His other foot moved. The squeaky boot made a small chirp against the polished floor, and every head in the hall turned. Roan kept walking. He didn't look at the nobles. He didn't look at the guards. He looked at his feet, mostly. Because looking at his feet was easier than looking at the entire civilization of Aetheria suddenly staring at a man in a grease-stained jacket walking up to their throne. The squeak of his boot echoed. It really echoed. He passed the third row. The second. He could hear someone whisper, "What is he doing?" And he didn't have a great answer to that question, so he kept moving. He reached the open space before the platform. He stopped. He looked up. Queen Thalira's eyes were on him. Sharp. Surprised. Reading him the way a swordsmith reads a blade. Princess Severin blinked. Just once. Slow. Roan raised one hand in a small, awkward wave. "Hello," he said. His voice carried farther than he expected. "I'm Roan," he continued. He gestured vaguely at his own jacket. "I'm an engineer. I fix orbital docking systems. I occasionally prevent ships from exploding. I'm not entirely sure how I ended up here exactly." He paused. He glanced behind him at the silent crowd. "But," he said, "since everyone else seems busy looking at the floor," he shrugged. "I figured I could help." The hall erupted, not with applause, with shock. Whispers crashed through the chamber like a wave hitting rocks. A man in the back dropped a small data tablet. The clatter sounded enormous. "You volunteer," the queen said slowly. Her voice was very quiet, very careful. Roan rubbed the back of his neck. "Well," he tilted his head. "Someone should." The whispers turned to gasps. Princess Severin's lips parted. Just a little. The queen, for the first time since entering the hall, looked almost at a loss for words. "You understand," she said. "What you are offering." Roan considered that. He had learned over the years that there were two kinds of answers a man could give in moments like this. The smart one, and the honest one. He chose honest. "Not really," he said. Half the room exhaled at once. A noble actually whispered a prayer. The queen's eyebrow lifted very slightly. "You offer," she said, "to marry my daughter," without understanding what that means. "That sounds about right." "You offer this freely." "I do. Even though you do not know who she is." Roan glanced at Severin, looked at her properly for the first time, not at her crown, not at her ears, at her eyes. The girl on the platform, the one nobody had stepped forward for. "I know enough," he said quietly. The silence that followed was different. It was softer, and then a sound. Small, almost startled. A laugh. It came from the princess. Severine covered her mouth, but the corners of her eyes crinkled, and Roan saw clearly, completely, the moment something cracked in her armor. Just a hair. Just enough. "I apologize," she said, her voice low. "It is only you are either very brave engineer or very uninformed." Roan considered. "Both," he said. "I think both is possible." She laughed again. Several nobles looked deeply personally offended by this development. Queen Thalira turned to her advisors. A holographic panel snapped to life beside her. Small scanning drones descended silently from the ceiling, one of them drifting lazily toward Roan. He watched it approach with the cautious respect of a man who knew exactly what scanning drones could do. "Should I stand still?" he asked. "Yes," one of the scientists said quickly. "Got it," Roan said. "Just fair warning. If this thing scans my brain, and I'm thinking about lunch, the readings are going to be confusing." A small noise came from the princess. He suspected it was another laugh, expertly disguised as a cough. The drone began its work. A thin blue beam traced across Roan's face, then his shoulders, then his oa. Genetic data spiraled into the air above him in long ribbons of glowing symbols. Roan watched them with the polite curiosity of a man watching weather. The chief scientist, a sharp woman in her 40s whose name tag read Quinlan, leaned forward at her console. She frowned. She zoomed in. She zoomed in further. Her face changed. Roan didn't know what the face meant, but he knew in the way an engineer always knew that something on her screen had just done the equivalent of catching fire. "Your Majesty," Dr. Quinlan said. Her voice was very, very careful. "I need you to look at this." The queen approached. The princess remained where she was, but her eyes had locked onto the holographic panel now, and Roan saw the corners of her composure begin to fray. Quinlan turned the display. 2 helices of genetic data spiraled in the air. One labeled Severin, one labeled unknown subject. They were braided together. Perfectly. "Compatibility index," Quinlan said. She stopped. She had to. "Optimal." The hall didn't react at first. It was as if the word didn't fit. As if the word was speaking a different language than the rest of the sentence. Optimal. No one had said that word in connection with Princess Severine in years. Decades, maybe. The Royal Registry had tested over 4,000 candidates. Lords, princes, diplomats, heirs from a dozen worlds. None of them had ever returned an optimal. A noble in the second row whispered, "That isn't possible." Another said, "There must be an error." "There is no error," Quinlan said. Her voice had a thin, stunned edge. "I have run this calculation 3 times. The result is," she looked up at the queen, "the cleanest match this kingdom has ever recorded." The queen's hand rose very slowly and pressed against her own collarbone, as if she needed to feel her own pulse to confirm she was still standing. Severin turned her head. She looked at Roan, and for the first time since she had walked into that hall, maybe for the first time in years, there was something in her eyes that wasn't resignation. It was hope. Small, fragile. The kind of hope that has been burned too many times to trust itself. But hope. "If the readings are correct," she said softly, "it means I may live." Roan felt the breath go out of him. He had expected politics. Maybe a complicated ceremony. Maybe a lecture about culture from a man with too many titles. He had not expected a life. He had not expected hers. He looked at the princess, at the queen, at the holographic helix glowing softly between them. "Okay," he said. His voice was quieter than before. He nodded once. "Okay. Good thing I walked up here then." The noble courts of Aetheria did many things well. Calm reactions to surprise was not one of them. The hall exploded into chaos. Voices overlapping hands raised scientists murmuring urgently into their tablets, 3 different lords trying to push toward the platform at once, and being politely but firmly stopped by guards. Somewhere in the back, an elderly noblewoman had to sit down. Through it all, Queen Aetheria raised one hand. The hall fell silent, almost instantly. Roan thought distantly that he wanted to learn how to do that. "Clear the chamber," the queen said. A few nobles protested. "Now," she said. The guards began moving people out, politely, firmly, without weapons drawn, but with absolutely no question about whether the order would be followed. Within 10 minutes, the great hall, which had held 200 nobles, held only 7. The queen, the princess, 3 royal scientists, 2 guards, and 1 engineer in a grease-stained jacket who was beginning to suspect his Tuesday was not going to recover. Queen Aetheria turned to face him. Up close, without the distance of the platform, she looked smaller. Not weak, just human. A woman and a mother, and an exhausted ruler who had spent too many years preparing herself to lose the only person she had left. "Engineer Maddox," she said. "Roan is fine," Roan said. "Roan." Her voice softened slightly around the name. "Do you understand now what you have offered? I'm getting there. My daughter has a condition." The queen's voice was steady, but each word cost her something. "The royal bloodline of Aetheria carries a genome too refined to sustain itself. It must bond with a compatible partner, or the structure collapses, cell by cell." Rowan's eyes flicked to Severin. She was looking at the floor. "How long does she have?" he asked. The queen hesitated. Quinlan answered. 3 days, she said. "At current decay rate, possibly less." Roan absorbed that. "And the bond," he said. "It's permanent." "Yes. Permanent, like permanent. Your immune systems will synchronize. Your neural pathways will align. Your emotional states may even bleed into each other," Severin said quietly. "Yes." The princess looked up. Her eyes met Roan's. "You may withdraw," she said. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't even a warning. It was an offer. A real one. The kind of offer a person makes when they have spent so long expecting to be left behind that they have learned to do it themselves first. Roan thought about his cargo shuttle, his coffee, his maintenance bay, his simple, quiet, predictable life. He thought about the watch in his pocket. He thought about a man with grease under his fingernails saying, "Don't be the kind of person who walks past." 22 years. He had been carrying that voice for 22 years. He looked at Severin. "You keep offering me a way out," he said. "Yes." Do you want me to take it?" She didn't answer right away. She looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that Roan felt seen in a way he hadn't been seen in a long time. Long enough that he understood suddenly that this wasn't about politics or genetics or royal bloodlines. This was about a young woman who had for years been quietly preparing to die and was now against every instinct allowing herself to consider that maybe she wouldn't. "No," Severin said softly. "I don't." Roan nodded. "Then I'm not going anywhere." The Queen closed her eyes, just for a second. When she opened them again, they were wet. She didn't let the tears fall. Queens Roan suspected rarely did, but she nodded once. A nod that meant thank you without saying it. "Tomorrow," she said, "we begin the bonding preparations. Tonight," she glanced at her daughter, "tonight you rest. Both of you." The scientists began packing their equipment. The guards moved into formation. The hall began the slow process of becoming quiet again. Roan stood there, trying to process what had just happened, trying to remember when exactly the morning had stopped being his morning and started being someone else's entirely. "Engineer." He turned. Princess Severin had stepped down from the platform. She was closer now, smaller in person than she had looked from across the hall. The crystal lights threw soft blue across her cheekbones. "Yes," he said. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request a person could really refuse. It also wasn't a request he wanted to refuse. "Sure," he said. They walked through the corridors of the palace in silence at first. The hallways were quieter at this hour. The crystal panels in the walls glowed faintly, pulsing in a slow rhythm Roan recognized as some kind of climate regulation. He noted professionally that the rhythm was off by about 3%. He filed it away to mention later. Severin led him to a balcony. It overlooked the lower gardens, trees with glowing blue leaves, pools of soft reflective water, twin moons hanging low and full above the horizon. She rested her hands on the railing. Roan rested his beside her. Carefully. Not too close. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "Why did you walk up?" she asked. He considered the question. "Because nobody else did." "That isn't an answer. It's the honest one." She turned her head toward him. "There is always more than one honest answer, engineer." Roan was quiet for a second. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. Slowly, carefully, he pulled out a small, scratched silver watch on a worn leather strap. He held it in his palm. "This was my father's," he said. Severin's eyes dropped to the watch. "He died when I was 8, Roan said. 22 years ago. He was a mechanic. Nothing fancy, he fixed things. That was the whole of him, really. He'd see something broken, and he'd fix it. He told me once that the world was full of broken things, and the only choice you really had in life was whether to be the kind of person who walked past them, or the kind of person who didn't." He turned the watch over in his hand. "I've been trying to be the second kind, ever since." Severin didn't speak. She was looking at him now. Not with pity, with something else. Something softer. Recognition. "You said your father died when you were 8, she said quietly. "Yes." She paused. "I lost mine when I was 3. Roan looked up. "He was the king before my mother," Severin said. Her voice was very even. The kind of even that came from talking about something carefully so it couldn't hurt as much. "I don't really remember him. I remember light, a laugh, the smell of something on his coat. Pine, maybe. I don't even know if pine grows on this world. I just remember it." She looked out over the gardens. He was sick, suddenly. They said it was a rare condition, that sometimes these things happen. She glanced at him. Quator. I never quite believed that. But I was 3. What did I know? Roan didn't say anything. He just listened. Below them in the garden, something moved. A small bird with luminous wings drifted between 2 trees and disappeared. The twin moons climbed another fraction of an inch into the sky. Severine let out a breath. You know, engineer, I have stood through that ceremony 6 times. He looked at her sharply. 6, once a year, since I turned 20. Tonight was the 7th. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. My mother believed every time that this would be the year, that this time someone would step forward. And nobody ever did. No. Until now. She turned to face him. Until you, she said. An engineer who wasn't even invited. Yeah. Roan rubbed the back of his neck. About that. There was a clerk with a scanner. And I don't care how you got here, Roan. He stopped. Nobody at the palace had used his first name yet. Hearing it in her voice felt strange. Not bad. Just unfamiliar. Like a tool he didn't know he owned. I just care that you did, she said. The wind shifted. It carried the faint scent of the garden up to the balcony. For a moment, Roan didn't say anything. He couldn't. There was a thickness in his throat that he didn't have the engineering vocabulary for, so he did what he always did when a feeling got too big. He looked for something to fix. He glanced up. He squinted. Hold on, he said. What? He climbed up onto the railing. Roan! He pulled himself into a maintenance hatch in the balcony's overhang. There was a faint clanking. A muttered, that's just lazy. Another clank. The faint humming that had been buzzing under the balcony's air vent. The one Severin had stopped noticing years ago, because it had simply always been there, fell completely silent. Roan dropped back down onto the balcony. He brushed dust off his jacket. Sorry, he said. It was bothering me. Severin stared at him. You just repaired the ventilation. He shrugged. I told you. I fix things. It's a reflex. She stared a little longer, and then for the second time that night she laughed. A real laugh. A small one. But a real one. You are a very strange man, Roan Maddox. I get that a lot. She shook her head slowly, looked back out at the gardens. For most of my life, she said, I have been told that this moment, any moment like this, would never come. That I should prepare, that I should be at peace with what was coming. That hope would only make it harder. She turned her eyes back to him. And then today, she said, an engineer walked into a hall full of nobles, and he did the one thing none of them would do. Severin. He stepped forward. Roan opened his mouth. He closed it. He didn't have an answer for that. He didn't think he needed one. They stood there side by side, 2 people who had each lost a father, looking out over a garden that glowed in the light of 2 moons. And somewhere in a wing of the palace, neither of them could see a tall figure in a long dark coat, watched a holographic readout pulse in his private chamber. A genome match he had spent 22 years making sure could never happen. Lord Vandross stared at the screen. His knuckles went white around the data tablet. That, he said quietly to no one, should not be possible. He set the tablet down. He walked to the window. He looked out at the same twin moons that the princess and the engineer were standing under 2 wings away. His jaw tightened. 22 years, he murmured. 22 careful years. He turned from the window. He pressed a small communicator against his ear. "Vel, it's me. Wake the others. We have a problem." A pause. No, a new one. He looked one last time in the direction of the eastern balcony. An engineer. Roan slept badly. The bed was too soft. The sheets were too smooth. The pillow had 3 settings, 2 of which he didn't understand, and 1 of which played soft music when he laid his head on it. He turned the music off. He stared at the ceiling. He thought about the woman on the balcony. 3 days. That was the number that kept coming back to him. 3 days. And she had stood through 6 of those ceremonies. 6. She had walked into a hall full of people every year and watched them refuse to look at her. Roan rolled onto his side. He stared at the wall, and he thought very quietly, "I'm going to fix this." He didn't know what this meant yet. He just knew he was going to fix it. The morning came in pale gold through the tall windows, and a soft chime woke him before he'd really managed to fall asleep. He sat up. He rubbed his face. He looked at his hand and noticed distantly that there was no grease on it. He didn't like that. Grease meant work. Work meant purpose. He missed it already. There was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," Roan said. The door opened and an older woman stepped through. She was small, compact, gray hair pinned back into a tight knot at the nape of her neck. A dark uniform with silver trim. Her eyes, sharp, clear, extremely awake for this hour, moved across him in a single quick sweep, took inventory, and apparently filed him under acceptable. "Engineer Maddox," she said. "That's me. My name is Bessa." She crossed the room with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been crossing rooms in this palace for a very long time. "I have been instructed to ensure you are dressed, fed, briefed, and delivered to the laboratory by the 9th bell." "Got it." He swung his legs over the side of the bed. "And what time is it now?" "The 8th bell. So I have an hour. You have 45 minutes. Right." Bessa set a tray down on the small table by the window. Bread, fruit, a pot of something that smelled blessedly exactly like coffee. Roan eyed her. "How long have you worked at this palace?" he asked. She paused. Her hand was on the teapot. 40 years, she said. 40. He whistled low. "You must know where every wire is in this place." "I know," she said carefully, "where every wire should be." There was a small dry note in her voice. Roan caught it, filed it away. He reached for the coffee. "Bessa." "Yes." "That's not the same answer." She looked at him. For just a second, something in her face shifted. Then it smoothed. "Eat your breakfast, engineer," she said. "You are going to need it." She left the room. Roan stared at the closed door for a long moment. Then he drank the coffee. It was at least an excellent cup of coffee. The walk to the laboratory was the strangest commute of his life. Servants moved past him with their eyes carefully on the floor. Guards saluted. A small group of nobles whispered behind a column and went silent the moment he glanced at them. Somewhere near the central courtyard, an old man dropped a tray of glass cups just from looking at. Yeah, too suddenly. Roan kept walking. He felt absurd. A man in borrowed clothes that fit him almost. An engineer carrying a borrowed jacket because he refused to give up his own. A stranger walking through corridors that had stood for thousands of years. But he kept walking. Because Severin was at the end of those corridors. The laboratory was a wide circular chamber at the heart of the research wing. Holographic panels filled the air. Drones hummed in slow circles. Dr. Quinlan stood at a central console with a tablet frowning the kind of frown a person wears when they are very smart and very awake and very behind. Severin was already there. She wore a simple pale gown, no crown, no jewels, just her. She looked up when he walked in. She smiled. Roan felt that smile somewhere in his chest he had not previously been aware existed. "Engineer," she said. "Princess. Sleep well." "Terribly." "Excellent. Welcome to my life." He laughed. Quinlan didn't look up from her tablet. "If the two of you are quite finished," she said, "I would like to keep the princess alive." That got their attention. The doctor gestured them toward the central platform. Two thin metallic bands. A soft blue light pulsing beneath the floor. Drones already warming. "This is a calibration run," Quinlan said. "Not the bond, just a partial neural sync. We must know how your systems respond to one another before we attempt the full ceremony." Roan rolled up his sleeves. "Walk me through it." Quinlan blinked. "You want me to walk you through it?" "I'm an engineer," he shrugged. "If something goes wrong, I'd rather understand the system than guess." For the first time, Quinlan looked at him properly, not at his jacket, at him. "All right," she said slowly. "Let me show you." She turned the holographic display. He stepped closer, and for the next 20 minutes, the two of them stood shoulder to shoulder, going through the architecture of an ancient bonding apparatus, the way two engineers might go through a cooling system. Quinlan pointed. Roan asked questions. Severin watched fascinated as the famously cold chief scientist of Aetheria, slowly, almost against her will, started using her hands when she explained things. "And the stabilization rings?" Roan asked. 8 of them. They cycle in pairs." "Why pairs?" "Resonance balancing." "Got it. And this node here, yes, it's drawing more current than the others." Quinlan stopped. She looked at the node. She frowned. "It shouldn't be." Roan tapped his finger against the projection. "It's a small thing, 3 or 4%, but across an 8-ring cycle that adds up." Quinlan's jaw tightened. "That should not be possible. This system was sealed for centuries." "Maybe," Roan said, "someone unsealed it." Quinlan looked at him. She did not smile. But Roan got the distinct impression that, in some small, private way, she had just decided she liked him. "Step onto the platform," she said. "Both of you." They stepped on. The band settled around their foreheads. The rings began to spin. Severine reached out and brushed the back of Rowan's hand with her fingers. Just once. Just briefly. "Don't panic," she said quietly. "I never panic," he said. "I problem-solve aggressively." "There is no difference. There is a profound difference." She smiled. The first wave hit them. It was not painful, but it was strange. A soft current moved through Roan's nerves. He felt it travel up his spine, behind his eyes, across the surface of his skin. He felt, and this was the part he had not been prepared for her. Not her thoughts, not her words, just the edges of her. Like standing close to a fire and feeling the warmth without ever touching the flame. She was nervous. He felt her nervousness. He glanced at her. She glanced back. Her eyes widened. "You can feel that?" she whispered. "Yeah." "Oh." The second wave hit. Severin's hand tightened around his. The drone spun faster. The rings glowed brighter. Quinlan was murmuring numbers into her console. 70% sync. 75. 80. The third wave hit, and something went wrong. Roan felt it before any of the displays registered it. A wrongness. A bright, sharp, off-key note inside the harmony of the bond. Like a wire crossed somewhere in a circuit it had no business being in. Severin gasped. Her knees buckled. "Quinlan!" Roan started. The lab alarms started screaming. The room went red. Drones froze in midair. The holographic displays began strobing. The 8 stabilization rings, instead of cycling, smoothly jerked. The light beneath the floor pulsed in a hard, ugly rhythm that did not match the soft blue from before. "Cut it!" Quinlan barked. "Cut it now! Emergency disconnect!" Roan didn't think. He grabbed Severin around the waist with one arm and swept her off the platform. The two of them hit the floor as one of the rings overloaded. A burst of light. A crack of energy. The smell of ozone. Quinlan was already at her console, slamming controls. Voice sharp, full system shutdown. Full system shutdown. Now. The room went dark, then dim, then quiet. Roan was on the floor with the Princess of Aetheria in his arms. She was shaking. So was he. "Severin," he said. "Severin, look at me. Look at me. Are you—" "I'm here." Her voice was thin. "I'm here. I'm here. Are you hurt?" "I don't think so." "Are you sure, Roan?" "What?" "I can feel your heart racing." He stopped. He stared at her. She looked up at him. "It's very loud," she said. He let out a breath that was half a laugh and half a sob. "Yeah," he said. "Sorry about that." Quinlan was at their side in a heartbeat. Hands moving. Scanner out. Eyes flicking from one to the other with the cold precision of a woman doing damage control. "You are both stable," she said after a long moment. "Vitals, neural, genetic, all within emergency tolerances." "What happened?" Roan asked. Quinlan stood up slowly. She looked at her console. She looked at the rings. Her face went very, very still. "Doctor," Roan said. "That node," Quinlan said quietly. "The one you noticed, drawing the extra current." "Yes." "It surged at exactly the third wave, at exactly the moment the bond would have begun to lock." He stared at her. "That isn't a malfunction," Quinlan said. "No. That is sabotage." The word sat in the air. Severin closed her eyes. She did not look surprised. That, more than anything, was what twisted in Roan's chest. She did not look surprised. The Queen arrived within minutes. Thalira's face when she saw her daughter on the floor broke for a half second. Just a half second. Roan saw it. The crack in the marble. The mother behind the Queen. Then the marble closed again. "Report," she said. Quinlan reported. Thalira listened. Her hand rested on her daughter's shoulder the entire time. She did not interrupt. She did not react. When Quinlan finished, the Queen was silent for a long moment. Then she said very quietly, "Find me the engineer who installed that node. Today." "Your Majesty." "Today, Quinlan." "Yes, Your Majesty." The Queen turned to Roan. "Engineer." "Your Majesty." "You saved my daughter's life this morning." He shook his head. "Quinlan saved her life. Quinlan cut the system. You moved the body." He didn't have an answer for that. Thalira held his eyes for a long, measuring moment. "Walk with me," she said. The Queen of Aetheria led him through corridors he had not seen before. Quieter corridors. Older. The crystal panels were dimmer here. The air smelled faintly of stone and time. They came to a small, private garden. Half wild, untrimmed. Roan suspected it had been someone's favorite place once, and then become no one's. She sat down on a stone bench. He stayed standing, until she gestured. He sat. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "My husband died 22 years ago." Roan's head turned slowly. "Yes," he said. "Severin told me." "Did she tell you he was poisoned?" He went still. "No," he said. "No," the Queen said. "She does not know that." The garden was very quiet. "I know it," Thalira said. "I have known it for 22 years. I have never been able to prove it. I have never been able to find the hand that did it. So I have ruled, and I have raised her, and I have prayed every night that whoever did it would not come for her too." She looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but she was not crying. "And now," she said, "someone has tried to kill her in my own laboratory, and the only person in this palace I am sure I can trust is the man who walked in here yesterday by mistake." Roan didn't speak. He couldn't. "I do not have the right to ask you for more," she said. "You have already given more than anyone deserved to ask of you. You can ask. Roan, you can ask your majesty." She closed her eyes. She opened them. "Find them," she said. "Find whoever did this, before the 3rd day." He nodded. "Yes." "And Roan, yes. Be careful. Whoever wanted my husband dead, and my daughter dead, and you dead, they have been planning this for 22 years. They are very, very good at not being seen." She rose. She walked back into the palace. Roan sat on the stone bench for a long time afterward. He took out his father's watch. He turned it over in his hands. 22 years, the same number. Twice in 2 days he had heard that number. Once for his own father. Once for hers. He didn't believe in coincidences. Engineers rarely did. That night, Roan went looking for Bessa. He didn't quite know why. He just knew. He found her in a small service chamber off the main kitchens. She was polishing a silver tray. It already looked spotless. Roan got the sense she wasn't really polishing it. She was just doing something with her hands. He knocked on the open door frame. She looked up. She did not seem surprised to see him. "Engineer." "Bessa, you should be resting. I should be doing a lot of things." He stepped inside. He sat down across from her. 40 years, he said. She kept polishing. 40 years, he repeated. "In this palace." "Yes." "You came when you were 25. "Yes." "You served the king before this queen." A small pause. "Yes." "You knew him." The polishing slowed. "I knew him." "Bessa." "Yes." "You loved him." The cloth stopped moving. The old woman did not look up. "Like a son," she said softly. Roan let the silence sit. A long moment passed. Bessa set the cloth down. She folded her hands in her lap. She did not look at him. "He was a good man," she said. "King Aldrich. He was kind. He laughed too loud. He could not dance to save his life. He was 26 when he became king, and 29 when he became a father, and 32 when they buried him in a tomb made of glass and iron." She drew a shaky breath. "They said it was a bloodline weakness. A congenital fragility, the same condition his daughter now carries. And you didn't believe them. I did not believe them. Why? The old woman finally looked up. Her eyes were dry, but they were sharp, sharper than Roan had expected. Because the night he became sick, she said, I served him his evening tea. I served him the same tea I had served him every night for 4 years, and the next morning when I went to bring him breakfast, I found a second cup beside the first. Roan's mouth went dry. A second cup, he repeated. A cup I did not bring. Whose was it? She looked at him steadily. I never knew. I told Her Majesty. She believed me. But there was no proof. And in this palace, without proof, there is only silence. Bessa. Yes. Did you ever tell anyone else? No. Why not? Because I have been waiting, she said. For what? For the next cup. He stared at her. She held his gaze. And tonight, engineer, she said quietly. Someone tried to put one beside the princess. Roan didn't sleep that night either. He sat at the small desk in his room with a stylus and a slate, and he drew. He drew the floor plan of the laboratory. He drew the 8 stabilization rings. He drew the rogue node. He drew lines tracing where its power conduit had to feed back to. He drew a corridor, a junction, another corridor, and he drew, finally, a door. The door led to a wing of the palace he hadn't been in. The east wing, the wing of the royal council, the wing of Lord Vandross. He stared at the diagram for a long time. Then he stood up. He pulled on his jacket, the grease-stained one, the real one, and he went to find Severin. She was awake. He had somehow known she would be. He found her in the same garden where they had stood the first night. The twin moons were thinner tonight. The blue leaves rustled. She turned when she heard the squeak of his boot. You don't sleep either, she said. No. What is it, Roan? He hesitated. He thought briefly about not telling her, about protecting her, about letting her have one quiet night before the world tipped further. But then he looked at her, and he remembered her face on the platform. 6 ceremonies, years of watching nobody step forward. She had been protected enough. She had been managed enough. Your father, he said quietly. You were 3 when he died. She went very still. Yes. Severin. He stepped closer. I think someone in this palace killed him. The breath left her in one slow, shaky exhale. She didn't argue. She didn't say that's impossible. She didn't say, how dare you? She just closed her eyes and whispered, I have always known. He felt it like a punch. You knew. I didn't know. I felt it. The way the air went strange when certain people came into a room. The way my mother stopped smiling. The way no one ever really talked about him. Her hand pressed against her own chest. I felt it. Severin. Yes. I don't think it was just him. She opened her eyes. She looked at him. I think the same person, he said, has been trying to kill you for 22 years. The wind moved through the garden. Below them, the pools rippled. Severin did not cry. Severin did not run. Severin straightened her back, and in that moment Roan saw very clearly the daughter of Queen Aetheria. Tell me what you found, she said. He told her. The node, the current draw, Quinlan's reaction, Bessa's story, the cup, the second cup, the diagram, the east wing. She listened in silence. When he finished, she said very quietly, Lord Vandross. Possibly. He is my mother's brother. I know. He has stood beside her at every ceremony. I know. He held me when I was a baby. I know, Severin. She closed her eyes again, just for a second. Then she opened them, and they were not the eyes of a princess preparing to die. They were the eyes of a princess preparing to live. Show me the diagram, she said. He showed her. They worked through the night. And the next morning, when the eastern sun rose over the palace, Roan, Severin, Bessa, and Dr. Quinlan stood in a small private antechamber. Just the four of them. The blueprint of the laboratory floated in the air between them. This node, Roan said, pointing, is fed by an external conduit. The conduit shouldn't exist. The original system was sealed 800 years ago. Whoever placed this node had to splice into the palace's primary power grid. Quinlan nodded grimly. And to do that, you'd need access to the structural archive, the kind of access only members of the Royal Council have. Bessa folded her arms. There are 9 members of the Royal Council, she said. 7 are provincial governors. They do not live here. They visit twice a year. The 8th is the Queen herself. And the 9th, Severin said quietly, is my uncle. Roan looked at her. Yes. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Quinlan, of all people, broke the silence. There is something else. What? The doctor's hands worked over her tablet. A new projection bloomed in the air. A diagram. Genetic. 2 helices. One labeled Severin. One labeled Aldrich. The dead king. Severin's father. I dug into the royal archives last night, Quinlan said. I cross-referenced the original genome scans of the late king. I have been comparing them to every recorded compatibility test ever performed for the princess. And, Severin said. Quinlan hesitated. There were always candidates, she said quietly. Across all those scans, there were always candidates whose genetic profiles should have returned a strong compatibility match for you. Princess, there should have been hundreds. How many were ever flagged? None. Roan went cold. What did you say? Not a single candidate in 22 years of testing was ever flagged as a viable match. Quinlan looked up. Until you engineer Maddox. That's mathematically impossible, Roan said. It is, yes. Unless the system was rigged. Roan stared at the projection. The 2 helices, king and daughter. Quinlan. Yes. Who designed the original compatibility scanner? The doctor was very still. That information, she said carefully, is sealed. Quinlan. I am not supposed to know. Quinlan. She closed her eyes. She drew a breath. She opened her eyes. The current scanner architecture was designed 22 years ago, she said. Just before the late king's death, as part of a broader medical reform, commissioned by the council. Who built it? The chief engineer of the Royal Council at the time. Who was that Quinlan? She looked at Severin. Severin for a moment looked very young. It was my uncle, the princess whispered. Yes, Quinlan said. Vandros, Severin said. Yes. He built it before he became Lord Vandros. Yes, before he sat on this council as my mother's right hand. Yes, before he lifted me on his knee at my naming ceremony. Yes, the Princess of Aetheria placed both hands flat on the holographic table. She breathed in. She breathed out. She did not cry. She did not break. She straightened. He built the scanner, she said. He built the system that decides who I can marry. He built the system that has been telling everyone for 22 years that no one in this kingdom is good enough to save my life. Yes. And he murdered my father. Probably yes. And he tried last night to murder me. Yes. She turned to Roan. Her eyes were very, very clear. Roan. Yes. He did not plan for you. No. He could not have. No. Because his system is calibrated for Aetheria genetics. It never imagined a candidate from off-world. Which is why I'm alive. He swallowed. Yes. She looked at the diagram again. A quiet, terrible smile crossed her face. My uncle, she said, is going to regret being a thorough man. The summons came at midday. Lord Vandross, citing concerns about unauthorized investigations into palace affairs by foreign personnel, requested a private audience with the engineer. Roan stood in the corridor outside the council chamber. His jacket was still grease-stained. His left boot still squeaked. His father's watch was in his pocket. Bessa walked past him with a tray. She did not look at him. She just murmured very quietly as she passed. Be careful, child. He nodded. He pushed open the door. The council chamber was darker than the rest of the palace. Long, narrow. Stone walls with deep blue tapestries. A single layer, long table at the far end, and behind it alone, a tall man with silver hair and a perfectly cut coat the color of charcoal. Lord Vandross. He did not stand. He gestured to a chair. Roan walked the length of the chamber. The squeak of his boot was the only sound. He sat. The two of them looked at each other across the table. Vandross smiled. It was a polished smile, the kind of smile a man practiced in mirrors. Engineer Maddox, he said. Lord Vandross. You have caused quite a stir. I tend to. Indeed. Vandross leaned back. I find myself fascinated by you. A common laborer from a distant station, pulled into the heart of our kingdom by clerical error, pronounced by some quirk of biology the perfect match for my niece. Truly remarkable. It's been an unusual week, I imagine. A pause. Engineer, Vandross said. Let me speak plainly. I am told you have been making inquiries about palace systems, about archives, about my late brother-in-law. Roan said nothing. I'm also told, Vandross continued smoothly, that the bonding ceremony last night experienced what can only be described as a most unfortunate malfunction. A malfunction? Yes. That's an interesting word for it. Vandross's smile did not waver. Engineer, you are clearly a clever man. So allow me to be clever as well. He leaned forward. His eyes in the dim light looked almost black. Whatever you believe you have found, whatever you believe you understand, I would advise you very gently to remember that you are not from here. You do not know our politics, our histories, our shadows. You are a guest in a house that has stood for thousands of years, and houses like this one, they protect themselves. Are you threatening me, Lord Vandross? I am advising you. Roan rocked back slightly in his chair. He looked at the man across from him. He thought oddly about his father. 22 years. He thought about Severin's father. King Aldrich, a man he had never met. A man who had laughed too loud and danced badly, and held an infant daughter who had now grown into a woman planning to outlive her uncle. 22 years. He looked at Vandross, and very calmly he said, I've fixed harder things than you. The smile on Vandross's face faltered, just for a flicker, just for a heartbeat. Roan stood up. He walked the length of the chamber. His boot squeaked. At the door, he paused. He turned. "Lord Vandross." "Yes, engineer." "You should know something." "And what is that?" Roan smiled. It was a small smile, a polite one. "Engineers don't build machines that fail," he said. "We build machines that show us where the failures are." He pushed open the door. He stepped through. Behind him, Lord Vandross sat very still in the dim light of the council chamber. His knuckles on the polished wood of the table were white. Outside in the corridor, Severin was waiting for him. She did not ask how it had gone. She just took his hand. "Tomorrow night," she said. "The second ceremony." "Yes." "He'll try again." "Yes." "Are you afraid?" Roan looked at her. He thought about the watch in his pocket. He thought about a girl on a balcony saying, "I lost mine when I was 3. He thought about an old woman polishing a tray that didn't need polishing, waiting 40 years for a chance to finally speak. "No," he said. He squeezed her hand. "I'm ready." The morning of the third day came quiet. Roan had expected thunder. Some great storm rolling in over the towers. Some sign from the universe that today, at last, was the day everything broke open. Instead, the sun rose pale and gold. The crystal panels hummed their slow, peaceful rhythm. The gardens stayed green. The palace, which had no idea what was coming, kept being a palace. Roan stood at his window. He drank his coffee. He thought, "This is the kind of morning my father would have loved." And then he set the cup down. And he started getting ready. Because today, somebody was going to die. He just had to make sure it wasn't her. Bessa came at the 7th bell. She did not knock. She was past knocking now. She walked in, carrying a small folded cloth bundle, and she set it on his bed, and she looked at him with those 40-year-old palace eyes that had seen one king fall and were not going to see another. "What's this?" Roan asked. "Open it." He opened it. Inside was an old worn leather pouch. Inside that, a small ring of keys. The metal was tarnished. The teeth were odd. They didn't match any modern lock he had ever seen. He looked up. "These are old," he said. 800 years. He blinked. "Bessa." "Yes." "Are these service keys to the inner palace?" "Yes." "Why do you have these, Because 40 years ago," she said. "The king before this one gave them to me. He told me, Bessa, keep these. Quietly. There may come a day this palace needs a back door. And on that day, I want it to belong to someone I trust." Roan closed his hand around the keys. "He gave you these?" "Yes. Before he died. 3 weeks before." Roan went very still. He knew. He suspected. She drew a slow breath. "He told me if anything happens to me, do not speak. Do not act. Wait. The palace will know its own moment." She tilted her chin up. "Engineer, I have waited 40 years. The palace's moment is today." He didn't trust his voice. He just nodded. She pressed the keys into his palm, and she closed his fingers around them, and her old hand was steady on his knuckles. "You bring her back," Bessa whispered. "You hear me? You bring her back." "I will. Promise me." "I promise." "On what?" He pulled the watch from his pocket. He held it up. "On him." Bessa looked at the watch. Her eyes glistened. She nodded once. Then she turned and walked out the way she had walked in. Quietly, steadily, carrying the weight of 40 years like it was a folded napkin. The bonding chamber was deeper than the laboratory, carved straight into the bedrock under the palace. The walls were not stone. They were grown. Living crystal that had been shaped centuries ago by people whose names had been forgotten. Soft veins of energy moved through the rock like slow rivers of light. Severin was already there when Roan arrived. She wore a pale gown. Her hair was loose. She looked, Roan thought, very young and very brave and very tired. He crossed to her. He took her hand. "Sleep?" he asked. "No." "Same. How is your boot? Still squeaking?" "Good. I would not recognize you without it." He almost laughed. He almost cried. He pressed his forehead briefly to hers instead. The Queen entered. Quinlan, 2 trusted guards, Bessa, and then, last of all, ushered in with the calm grace of a man who had spent his entire life arriving exactly when he intended to Lord Vandross. Roan watched him. Vandross bowed to the Queen. Vandross greeted the princess with a smile that had been practiced in front of mirrors for 22 years. Vandross nodded politely to the engineer. He did not bow. "Your Majesty," Vandross said, "I came to offer my support on this most important of mornings." The Queen looked at him. For a long moment she said nothing. Roan saw in her eyes 1,000 calculations. Then she said very gently, "Of course, brother. Stand near. Watch." Roan glanced at Quinlan. Quinlan glanced at Bessa. Bessa glanced at Severin. Severin glanced at Roan. A single look passed between 5 people who all understood at once that the trap was set. The only question was, who walked into it? The bonding rings began to spin. Quinlan ran the calibration in silence. Her hands were steady. Her face was not. Roan stood beside Severin on the platform, his fingers laced through hers, his pulse hammering in his throat. The first wave hit. Soft. Calm. Roan felt Severin in his nerves again. Not nervous this time. Determined. A clear, steady, strong frequency under his skin. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. The second wave. The room glowed brighter. Severin's breath quickened. The third wave. Quinlan's eyes flicked to her console. Her face changed. "Surge incoming," she said quietly. Just as before. Vandross behind her did not move, but Roan saw it. Saw the smallest flicker. The smallest tightening of the man's jaw. The kind of expression a man makes when he is watching the trap go off and is waiting for the body to fall. Quinlan looked up. Her eyes met Roan's. She nodded once. Roan let go of Severin's hand. He stepped off the platform. The room froze. Vandross's head turned sharply. "Engineer," he said. "What are you?" Roan did not answer him. He walked across the chamber. He walked past Vandross. He walked to the central node, the one he had spent the last 48 hours mapping, the one he had memorized the wiring of by lamplight, the one that fed power into the rigged surge. He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his father's watch, a small steel watch. Old. Scratched. 22 years in his pocket. A watch. And also, a small, very precisely calibrated magnetic pulse generator, which his father had carried for the entirety of his career because his father had been the kind of mechanic who never went anywhere without one. Roan had spent yesterday quietly, carefully restoring it. He pressed it against the node. He twisted the crown. The watch hummed. The node sparked. The surge. The surge that was supposed to kill the Princess of Aetheria for the second time in 3 days collapsed into a flat, useless ripple. The bonding rings stuttered, stabilized, resumed their normal rhythm. The blue light beneath the platform smoothed out. Quinlan exhaled. Severin gasped. And Lord Vandross went pale. "What?" he said softly. "What did you just—" "I disarmed your bomb," Roan said. The Queen's head turned, slowly, toward her brother. Vandross opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. That is absurd. That is a ridiculous accusation. There is no— 22 years, Roan said. You designed the compatibility scanner 22 years ago. You set it to filter every viable match away from this princess. You put the first cup beside her father's tea, and you have been waiting ever since to put the second cup beside hers. This is slander. This is. Quinlan has the records. Bessa has the testimony. The palace has the wiring. You did not plan for me, Vandross. You designed a system to kill an Aetherian princess. You did not design a system that could see a human heart. Vandross's face cracked. His composure, 22 years of careful, polished, perfect composure, cracked. His hand moved, inside his coat. Roan saw it. Severin on the platform saw it. The Queen saw it. Vandross, Thalira said. He drew the weapon. It was small, sleek, an energy pistol built into the lining of his coat. He had probably carried it for years, probably never expected to use it, probably had told himself every single day that he was a strategic man, an elegant man, a man who killed with cups and not with guns. And now the cup wasn't working, so the gun would have to. He raised it. He pointed it at Severin. 22 years, Vandross said, and his voice was cold and shaking at once. I have waited for that throne. 22 years. I am not going to lose it to a child and an engineer. Severin did not move. She lifted her chin. She looked her uncle dead in the eye. Then shoot me, she said softly. Uncle, after you held me as a baby, after you stood at my mother's side, after you smiled at every one of my birthdays, pull the trigger. Vandross's hand trembled. You are weak, he hissed. This kingdom has been weak. My sister has been weak. Your father was weak, and you— He raised the pistol higher. You are a symptom, he spat. I am the cure. Roan moved. He did not run. He did not shout. He moved. 3 steps, the watch in his hand. He passed Quinlan. He passed the platform. He stepped between Vandross and Severin. The pistol was now pointed at Rowan's chest. Vandross laughed. It was a thin, ugly laugh. You, he said. Engineer. You are going to stop me with what? A wrench? No, Rowan said. He raised the watch. He twisted the crown. The pulse went off. A small, focused magnetic burst, the kind a station mechanic carried to safely disable a malfunctioning power tool, fired straight into the energy pistol at point-blank range. The pistol's energy core seized. The grip locked. The trigger jammed. Vandross pulled it anyway. Nothing happened. He pulled it again. Nothing happened. He stared at the dead weapon in his hand. He looked up at Roan. Roan held up the watch. It ticked gently. My father, Rowan said quietly, told me the world was full of broken things, and the only choice you really had in life was whether to walk past them or fix them. He stepped closer. Vandros stumbled back. He didn't get to fix you, Lord Vandros. Roan's voice was very soft now. He didn't get the chance. He was the wrong father on the wrong world who never met you. But I'm here today, and I think... He smiled. It was a small smile, a polite one. I think today his watch finally got to do its job. The guards were already moving, 2 of them. Trained loyal, the kind that the Queen had personally vetted. They had Vandros on his knees before he could speak again. The pistol clattered to the floor. A 3rd guard was already at the door and on a comm calling for the rest of the palace watch. Vandros on his knees looked up at the Queen. For one moment, the carefully practiced face was gone. What remained was just a man. A small, frightened, ordinary man. "Sister," he said. "Thalira." "Please." The Queen of Aetheria looked down at her brother. For a long moment she did not speak. When she did, her voice was very soft, very tired, very, very old. "You held her," Thalira said. "When she was a baby, you held her in your arms. You smiled at me over her head. Do you remember?" Vandros did not answer. "I do," she said. "I remember. I will remember for the rest of my life." A tear slid finally down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. "Take him," she said to the guards. They took him. The bonding chamber was very quiet after he was gone. Severin was still on the platform. The rings were still spinning. Quinlan looked at her console. She looked up. "We can finish," she said softly. "If you want." Roan turned. He looked at Severin. She was pale. She was shaking. She was still standing. "Princess," he said. "Engineer." "You ready? Ask me one more time." "Princess," he said. "Are you ready?" "Yes." He climbed back onto the platform. He took her hand. He laced his fingers through hers. "Quinlan." "Yes, engineer." "Run it." She ran it. The rings spun faster. The blue light pooled and brightened. The first wave came gentle, now smooth. Now the system finally doing what it had been built 800 years ago to do. Roan felt her again, but this time there was no trap. There was no ugly note. There was just Severin, her mind, her warmth, the steady, certain frequency of a woman who had decided at last to live. He felt her smile before he saw it. The second wave. He felt her relief. The third wave. He felt her love. Not a grand, sweeping, music-swelling love. Something quieter than that. Something better. The love of a person who had been seen for the first time in a very long time. The love of a person who had been chosen. Roan on the platform felt his own heart open. He had not chosen her on the night he walked up. That had been kindness. That had been instinct. That had been a watch in his pocket, and a father in his memory, and a quiet refusal to walk past. But now, he chose her, not the princess, not the role, not the genome. Her, the young woman who had stood on a balcony and told him about Pine, the fourth wave, the bond locked. The blue light flared once softly like a sigh. Then it faded. The rings slowed. The room went still. Princess Severin of Aetheria stood on the platform, and she did not collapse. She did not weaken. She did not die. She breathed in. She breathed out. She lived. The queen made a sound Roan would carry in his memory until the end of his life. It was not regal. It was not composed. It was the sound of a mother who had spent 22 years preparing to bury her child and had just been told she would not have to. Thalira sank to her knees, right there in the bonding chamber. The Queen of Aetheria on her knees on the floor with her hands pressed to her mouth, weeping. Bessa crossed to her, the old woman who had served her king and her queen and her princess for 40 quiet years, knelt beside her sovereign and put her arms around her, the way no protocol on any world would have allowed, but she did anyway, because there are moments where protocol does not matter. Thalira buried her face in Bessa's shoulder. She wept like a daughter. She wept like a wife. She wept like a mother. Roan stepped down off the platform. He didn't think he could speak. He did not trust his voice. So he just walked over to where the queen and the housekeeper were on the floor, and he sat down beside them, and he did not say anything. And after a moment, Severin came down too, and she sat with them, and the four of them just stayed there together for a very long time. Quinlan, who was usually a very composed woman, turned away and pretended to be very interested in her console. Her console was completely off. The trial of Lord Vandross took place 3 weeks later. Rowan attended. He sat in the gallery in a clean jacket because Bessa had absolutely refused to let him wear the grease-stained one. Not in front of judges, she had said. You can wear it again at the wedding. He had laughed. He had laughed for 10 minutes. Bessa had watched him, hands on her hips, with the patient expression of a woman who had won. The trial lasted 2 days. The evidence was overwhelming. The wiring of the rigged scanner, the doctored compatibility records, the testimony of Bessa, who finally spoke after 40 years about a second cup of tea on a king's morning table. A confession from one of Vandross's accomplices, who had broken under questioning. Lord Vandross was stripped of his title, his lands, his name from the family register. He was sentenced to imprisonment in a remote facility on the kingdom's outermost moon, where he would live out the remainder of his days in a small, quiet cell, looking at a small, quiet sky. It was Rowan thought less than he deserved. It was also, he thought, more mercy than the man had ever shown anyone. 2 worlds in one ruling. The wedding came 1 month after the trial. Roan tried to wear his old jacket. Bessa, on her honor, swore she would set it on fire if he did. He compromised. He wore a new jacket tailored deep blue with a very subtle silver thread along the collar, and he kept the old one folded in a drawer in his quarters, because some things you don't burn. Severin wore a gown the color of starlight. The gown was beautiful. She was more beautiful. The ceremony was held in the Great Hall of Aetheria, the same hall where 2 months earlier an exhausted queen had asked a question into a silence, and a man with a squeaky boot had walked up. The hall was full again. Different this time. The nobles had returned, of course. They came back the way nobles always do. With smiles, with apologies, with careful, polished expressions of joy. But this time, they were not the ones at the center of the room. This time, in the front row by the queen's own command, sat Bessa in a new gown that she had refused 6 times, and finally accepted only because Severin had personally asked her to. The old woman sat very straight in that front row, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes shining. Quinlan stood at her right. 2 seats stood empty on the bride's side, one for Severin's father, one for Roan's. Nobody mentioned them. Nobody had to. The ceremony was simple. Vows, a bond, A promise. Roan held Severin's hands. He looked at her face. The face that had once been resigned. The face that had once been preparing to die. The face that now smiled freely. A smile she had been saving up for a long, long time. He had a speech prepared. He had practiced it. He forgot every word. He just said, "I'm not a prince." Severin smiled. I noticed. I was never going to be. I'm a man who fixes things. That's it. That's all I am. Roan. And the day I walked into this hall, I didn't walk in to save a princess. I walked in because there was a woman in pain, and nobody was helping her. And that's the only language my heart speaks. She squeezed his hands. I didn't choose you because of a scan. I didn't choose you because of a bloodline. I didn't choose you because of a ceremony. He swallowed. I chose you because somewhere in this big, strange palace there was a woman on a balcony who told me about Pine. And I knew the moment she said it that I was never going to walk past her. Severin's eyes filled. I chose you, Severin, he said. I'm still choosing you. I'm going to keep choosing you. Every day. For as many days as we get. She didn't speak. She just kissed him. The hall this time did not erupt with whispers. It simply quietly applauded. A long, warm, real applause. After the ceremony, the gardens were thrown open. The court spilled out under the twin moons. Music played. Servants brought food. Children, actual children, of which Roan had not realized there were any in the palace, chased each other across the lawns, shrieking the way children do everywhere. Roan stood near a stone railing. His new jacket was already crumpled. He didn't care. Bessa came up beside him. The old woman was holding a glass of pale wine. She was, Roan thought, a little tipsy. He had never seen Bessa tipsy before. He liked it. You did all right, child, she said. I had help. You did. He smiled. Bessa. Yes. 40 years. Yes. What now? She looked out across the garden. At the laughing children. At the queen, deep in conversation with Quinlan. At the princess who was being twirled across a stone path by a delighted Roan-shaped husband moments earlier. Now, Bessa said quietly, I rest. He nodded. You earned it. I did. A long pause. Engineer. Yes. Your father would be proud of you. He didn't speak for a long moment. He couldn't. Yeah, he managed finally. I think yeah. I think so too. She patted his arm the way a grandmother would. She walked off into the garden. Severin returned to him after a while. She was a little out of breath. Her cheeks were pink. Her crown was slightly crooked. He fixed it. Of course he fixed it. She caught his hand against her temple. She smiled up at him. Engineer. Princess. Walk with me. He walked with her. They went by some unspoken agreement back to the balcony. The same balcony where they had stood that first night when she had told him about Pine, and he had told her about a watch. The twin moons hung low again. The garden glowed below them. Behind them, faintly, the music of the wedding drifted across the night air. Severin reached into a small pocket in her gown. She pulled out a music box. He recognized it. It was the one he had repaired in her chambers, the one her father had given her, the one no one had been able to fix in 22 years. She placed it on the railing between them. She opened the lid. A soft, simple melody played out into the night air. A lullaby. A child's song. A song that had once been sung by a king to a baby princess on a balcony like this one. Roan's breath caught. Severin reached into the music box. She pulled something out, a small, scratched silver watch on a worn leather strap. His father's watch. She looked up at him. "I asked Bessa to put it inside," she said softly, "while you weren't looking." "Severin, I wanted them to meet." He laughed. It was watery. It was happy. It was the laugh of a man who had been carrying a watch for 22 years and had finally set it down somewhere safe. He reached into his jacket. He pulled out a small object he had been carrying all day. He set it down on the railing next to the music box. A tiny hand-machined gear. He had made it himself that morning in a small workshop in the palace. Out of a piece of metal Bessa had quietly left on his workbench. A piece of metal Bessa had told him that she had been keeping for a very long time. The metal had once belonged to a king. The gear was small, simple, steady. It fit into the music box perfectly. "There," Roan said quietly. "Now they're family." Severin pressed her forehead against his. The music played. The moons rose. The palace, 8,000 years old, hummed gently around them. Somewhere down in the gardens, an old housekeeper sat on a stone bench with a glass of wine in her hand, and tears finally on her cheeks. Somewhere in a small, quiet cell on a far moon, a man who had spent 22 years building a kingdom of shadows looked up at a sky he could no longer touch. Somewhere in the great hall, a queen for the first time in a very, very long time laughed. And on the balcony, a princess and an engineer stood side by side in the moonlight. She was alive. He had stepped forward, and the world, against every odd, against every silence, against every careful design of a man who had thought himself untouchable. The world had been fixed.